Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of video game news and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Today is Monday, December 19th. We are very close here towards Christmas, and so I would assume for the most part, most people are done with doing anything important for the year. Um, And I also assume that means a lot more people are going to be at home and a lot more people are going to be on the internet. I was having internet trouble over the weekend, even on Friday's stream, and um, I thought it was my backup software, and maybe the backup software was hurting it. I really don't know what triggered this, but at the core of it, it seems like there was just a key bit of information that I was not aware of. Um, the machine allocation, the MAC addresses, whatever that stands for, machine allocation code, I think is what it might stand for. Uh, I thought that those codes, which are 6 pairs of 2 hexadecimal numbers, to identify every single modem in the world as being somewhat unique and separate. I thought there was no extra information encoded in that at all. That you could just, if you're doing a MAC address cloning, if you're trying to increase your privacy so somebody can't trace you by a MAC address, which honestly, if somebody is spying on you, and particularly if they're a government agency, they're not going to just be tracing you by MAC address. They're going to be tracing you by a lot of different factors. But yeah, I thought when you could do that, you could put basically any number and it would work just fine. Turns out that's not so. The first pair of hexadecimal codes has a special meaning if you set the ones bit on. That would be like anything that in binary has a 0001 at the end, or something 1 at the end. If you set that on, apparently that's a MAC address broadcast or unicast code, which I didn't even know such a thing existed because I didn't think you could even multicast or broadcast using a MAC address. I thought you had to use IP addresses for that, which is the next layer upwards on the OSI model of networking, which is not something people should have ever invented, in my opinion, let alone understand. But yeah, if you have the ones bit set on, you are doing a multicasting, and I guess I've had that set that way this entire time for some of my Wi-Fi MAC addresses, and it's been working, but then it just stopped working and just started giving me a lot of trouble. Although, in fairness, I guess it really hasn't been working because I've been having these constant, like, we lost connection, we gotta reset, we gotta redo it, particularly when I'm playing like a game on my phone, when I'm playing Destiny Child, when I'm playing the Goblins mining game, when I'm playing Marvel Snap. Particularly the games were doing something, and that must just be the way games are designed for Android apps. And they were constantly just running into trouble. And so I was able to change that. Now it seems like I'm not running into any problems at all. I've had the smoothest of internet experiences that I've had in months, if not over a year. Also, it's worth pointing out that the 2's bit, that would be something 1, then something, in the first pair of hexadecimal codes in the MAC address. If you set that to 1, you are telling the people that it is a locally configured MAC address, and to not assume that it is globally unique or universally unique. We probably shouldn't even use the word globally because we're going to end up with internet on different planets eventually. Might as well just be forward looking. So the easiest thing I could say is, if you wanted a broadcast address, the first pair should be 01, and you probably don't need that unless you're assigning a MAC address to something like a bridge that really should be a broadcast address. And then any individual device or endpoint, like a Wi-Fi access point address or an Ethernet port address, that should probably start 02. Like, there are other combinations that would set the 1s and 2 bits that way, but easiest would be 01 and 02. If you were assigning the bridge and you wanted to admit that it was a local address, you probably would go with 03 at that point. And I guess 03 might be a little bit smarter than doing 01, because 01 is literally saying that the bridge would be globally unique when it's not. Yeah, and that's just, I thought I knew a lot about networking, but the more you know about networking, the more you realize you don't know anything about networking. So that was surprised me quite a bit. And sadly, that took all this weekend. As far as the accountability section, that is basically all I can say. I knew that I was going to have some non-YouTube stuff to do, so I was doing some of that. It wasn't particularly much ado about nothing. It was just kind of a wasting time sitting around, which it was fine. It was a relaxing sitting around doing nothing in a world of being a YouTuber where relaxing sitting around and doing nothing is usually seen as a sacrilege, and it's fine to do that every now and then. I don't do it that much, and frankly, I'm so far behind anyways as far as much content as I'd like to make what's one more weekend. But then I did spend most of the week just fighting with my router and with the Wi-Fi just not working particularly, and not understanding why it wasn't working. I honestly was just, with every desperate setting change and every desperate reboot, thinking that my router had broken. And I already replaced the router once because I thought it was broken, and I do not want to replace it at this moment because I'm hoping that I could get a much newer Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7 Wi-Fi router that, because the WRT 3200 ACM I'm using now is like 5 years old, and its CPU and GPU, well, it doesn't have a GPU, its CPU is just more than 5 years old for like a small home office thing. And so processing higher speeds and processing quality of service and things like that is it's just not really powerful enough to do a good job at that. They want you to do a survey here with the Duels Cup, but they're not promising any rewards. So while I could give them an earful as far as how awful the Duels Cup was, and I say was because I am done with it, it's not going to reward me any. I think I actively did accomplish all of these playing off screen. That would be my assumption. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a couple more that I just didn't finish. Let's see what happens when we clear this off. Yeah, it just disappears. So there may have been some that I didn't finish. But I didn't make it into phase 2. Or stage 2 of the Duelist Cup. And so that leaves us now with the rest of this month just trying to get up to Platinum and getting these daily quests, which have been neglected, done. Let's see. That does mean the biggest reward that we had were these 10 packs of Duelist Cup cards. Before we click this, let's just see what would have been included in this card compared to what we already had. It's a small selection of cards, of which I have a lot of them already, at least in one copy. So this is hardly, I think, going to lead towards building a new deck that would be really viable. There, we got a new card, but you can see the packs are really only giving us 2 cards, so all that extra effort gives us 20 cards and some gems. And while these may be somewhat hand-picked cards, getting a 2-pack of normals is definitely not going to be amazing. I often wish that games like this would unlock your odds of getting more copies of something once you've gotten the first copy. Although in this game in particular, since you have about 10,000 cards in that you're trying to get, if I all of a sudden got a higher chance of getting a second copy of this because this is new, that really wouldn't help much. In this game, getting new, if you're gonna manipulate the odds at all, which would take extra programming, you'd say getting new puts it in a different pool that increases your odds of getting a second copy, and then increases your odds of getting a third copy, and then once you get a third copy, you never get another copy, or you're in a much lower odds of getting a third copy. You could definitely manipulate how the odds are played, but it would be very large database tables for each individual person. You could put it into some kind of local processing where when opening the pack, the local app has a database of what each individual player has and pulls from new card pool versus second copy pool versus third copy pool versus fourth plus copy pool. But yeah, you get as much excitement or as much reward just opening these cards packs, which we still have a ridiculous amount of. And I can't go back and look at that pool to see how many cards those packs would have helped with. It's probably close to being safe enough to think about opening more of this secret pack. I guess it would just really come down to, do I think I'd get more copies? I think I'd say no here. Like, you're seeing kind of a significant amount of 2 or 3 plus copies of the lower cards, and I just don't have enough gems to try and get ultra rares. Inevitably, you are gonna just have to hope that at some point there will be something that would give you ultra rares at a much higher rate, or that they would change their crafting system so that you could use normal crafting dust to craft ultra rares. Otherwise, you are going to always, unless you throw a bunch of money at it, you're always going to be in this situation where you're never going to have as many ultra rares as you would want. And there's still this weirdness where there's a lot of cards here that just can't be dismantled, and it just does not make any sense for me to have 7 copies of like this card here. Is that what that says? 8 copies of this card here. But it says can dismantle, and yet for some reason I can't dismantle any of these because they were either obtained as a structured deck or they were distributed cards. So at some point, it may very well become valuable to stop buying structured decks, because I may already have 3 copies of everything, or the distributed cards need to be rethought through. I would almost certainly have considerably more dust if I could dismantle a bunch of cards. There'd be a way to really test this. As far as having at least one of every card, we're down to this point, which, moving this bar slowly down this way seems like it's going to get more and more difficult. Let's see, if we went to like ultra rares here, yeah, I have 6 ultra rares here, I have 4 ultra rares here, so it wouldn't be a lot. It would just be 7 cards that have more than 3 copies that I could potentially dismantle for ultra rares. So I'm not losing out too much on ultra rares. I bet I'm losing out a lot more on super rares. A little bit more. I guess not that much more. Like, there's 4 here, so we're talking 11 cards. And then it's probably going to get really crazy when we start looking at rares. Yeah, you hit the 3s here. So you have over a full page. 6, 9, 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. Yeah, about 32 cards that have more than 3 copies there. Yeah, I guess it's not that big of a deal when you really start to count the numbers. I thought it was a much larger issue. It is a fairly large issue here with normal cards. So again, if I was going to change anything, I'd just unify these crafting points and allow at least normal cards, when you have over 3, to be dissolved into crafting points. Because, yeah, here's where it stops, where we still have 4 copies. So it's a pretty big percentage as far as normal cards go of having extras, but not really that much. It's kind of not worth complaining about it at that point. So, as far as the Duels Cup went, I made it to level 16 and then ran out of time because I wasn't really paying attention or spending a lot of time on it. Inherently, even when I am trying to play offline, I'm not paying enough attention to this, so a lot of times I am just getting bored and surrendering, being auto-surrendered because I'm not moving fast enough. So I could have gotten another 200 gems, another 100 gems, another 100 gems, and then this, if I probably played like non-stop for an entire day and gotten really lucky, and then that would have gotten us to stage 2, which frankly, even if I made it to stage 2, you're talking 20 more cards, probably not getting in the top 10,000. Even if I did, that would just be then 40 more cards and some visual things. Inherently, even they are admitting that these reward tickets, as far as card packs with 2 cards in them, are not big enough rewards. It's ridiculous. And it does kind of seem like they are just trying to make the Duelist Cup, make the Duelist Cups not seem like big deals if you skip them, which seems like a weird direction to go when you really should be making them feel like big deals, and you should be rewarding accordingly. For as much as we poop on games that have a ton of monetization in them and just like way too much stuff to buy and 3 different currencies and all of that, I both have to applaud and boo Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel for their monetization efforts. Like they have microtransactions to buy gems, but they've made a game where it's not really necessary ever to buy gems unless you're just trying to own all the cards or trying to pay to win in some way, crazy way. But then, because they've made it so easy to never go to the shop and actually spend real world money, there's kind of nothing you can do with the gems that's that valuable anyways. And it creates these events that can't properly reward a person because the only rewards that are available are nearly worthless card packs. They could be giving away some of the accessories and things like that. It would potentially make some sense if the accessories were on a secondary currency like so many other games, and so card backs and different mates and things like that were bought in, instead of gems, say gold, and then you had to convert gems into gold, but you couldn't convert gold into gems, and then you could be rewarding the players when they're doing a championship with a certain amount of gold to spend only on visual things. Like that kind of would make some more sense. Or you could skip out on the second currency and just say you get a random mate you don't already own, or credit for a random mate if you already own all the mates. And particularly if you don't even bother to credit for people who own all the mates anyways, then you can, that would effectively demotivate anybody who has already bought everything from even bothering to play the tournaments. And then the tournaments could just be for the newer free-to-play players who don't want to spend gems on accessories. Since I really have nothing else to say about the accountability section, I'm just very happy I got to the Wi-Fi seeming to work. I'm gonna wait a few weeks, try and get some more backups. I need to actually set up a better system to back up the router itself. One of the things when installing a new version of the betas when I was playing with it, although I eventually just installed back an older version, is that the SSH secure shell protocol on DDWRT is apparently transitioning from using the older RSA encryption scheme into the newer elliptical curve encryption scheme, which means that any device trying to connect to it is going to have a new fingerprint, and you'll get a big warning that says this may be a man-in-the-middle attack. It isn't, but yeah, generally you don't want to change that. And so I'm going to get around that by just maintaining the RSA code. But yeah, they're moving forward and continuing to add features and polish it, as much as it seems like it's mostly a 1 or 2 person team that's working on DDWRT. Inherently, I still would like to go to a different type of chipset, using a Marvel chipset instead of a Broadcom chipset in my next Wi-Fi router. and go to Open WRT and try that out. But yeah, I also need to set up Borg backup, which is already installed on my router because I had already done that, but I need to set it up to actually back up the router itself to the hard drive plugged into it instead of not doing that. It's not doing anything right now to back up the router. Although, honestly, what it would be backing up would be just a backup of stuff that gets erased anyways. The operating system on DDWRT routers are like read-only firmware type files, so with the exception of the RSA key, there's really never been a single file on it that I needed to back up, because all the settings and all the non-read-only stuff are saved in a non-volatile RAM partition, and they're completely separated. It's not a terrible thought. It's definitely something Windows has tried to move towards, is that the entire operating system would be just on a read-only partition, and all the settings would only be in the users folder of a different yeah, they don't do full partition read-only in Windows, but they're trying to make everything in the Windows folder something you never change, except for when Windows Update changes it, and they're trying to make all the settings be in the users folder, and even like the program files folder, they're trying to keep that to mostly be settings that don't change as much. Linux leans much more heavier into that concept. I should have just ended the turn a minute ago, where Linux actively asks you whether you want to put the home folders in Linux on a different partition, and it's fairly recommended. Although, in all fairness, when the Linux also sometimes asks you if you want to put other folders on other partitions, and whether or not you even know what those folders do is really a crapshoot. But yeah, eventually I'm gonna give it a month or two, and then I'll have to upgrade the hardware. Particularly if I can get just a month or two. I also need to see where my internet service provider's initial offering price changes to, because I suspect that it may double or triple in price, and it may end up just changing back to my old internet provider at a much cheaper price. Well, that did absolutely nothing. Interesting. That's a weird card to even be playing. It's like jars. I don't think people play jars anymore. Alright. Going through my Twitter feed. I suppose as the drama on Twitter continues, last night Elon Musk, being the troll that he is, put up a poll saying should he step down as CEO, and then when everybody said yes, or the poll ended with yeses winning, let's leave it at that, he came out and said that most of the people who clicked yes were bots. This is interesting. We have a Marvel Snap showing a winter variants of their cards. I would assume that would show up in the game, but I haven't seen it in the game so far. Still playing Marvel Snap, still not really satisfied with it as an experience. It's really just not a game for me. I guess since it's somewhat video game related too, I've officially given up on Zelda Breath of the Wild. I made it halfway through there and wasn't really having the greatest amount of experience. So, like, in this case, it wasn't so much a rage quit as I was bumming the game off a friend, and the friend was very patiently wanting it back for like a year, and so I did not do right by that friend, obviously. But yeah, I have a couple of games I know I've bought for myself for Christmas as far as the Nintendo Switch, but also I just need to burn through whatever games I'm actually going to play on the Switch and just be done with it, because I just don't have time to play Nintendo games that I can't make footage around because of Nintendo being a Content ID copyright claimer. But yeah, I'm fairly disappointed in what Breath of the Wild was, in the sense that it is just not so much feeling like it never really felt like a Zelda game. It just didn't have that appeal as far as going through dungeons, because there's no dungeons, as far as collecting unique, useful items, because there really don't seem like they're unique, useful items. In a lot of ways, that is in part my fear around things like Cereza and the Lost Demon, the Bayonetta spin-off game, is that you'll just have something labeled as Bayonetta games, as being a Bayonetta game, when really it is not much of a Bayonetta game in the first place. Or Zelda Breath of the Wild being labeled as Zelda game when it really is not a Zelda game. I may take some time to see if I can find some cutscenes on YouTube to just get a general idea of what the story was supposed to be. How you actually collected the story in Breath of the Wild is not much of anything anyways. Yeah. Ideally, as a PC gamer, I'm just having to lower my standards and try to find something that feels something like a Zelda game, like Tunic, for instance. I've heard people say that is very much like a Zelda game, but it's on PC and not made by Nintendo. There is definitely a point that needs to be pointed out in the fact that there has been a failure of competition quite a bit against Nintendo, even since the early 80s when the NES came out. Like, people were constantly trying to make low effort, bad rip-offs of Nintendo games instead of trying to actually compete on quality and make better versions of games. And it's not like Nintendo has the largest history of suing people for making competitors. Sonic, for instance, is almost certainly a direct competitor to Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, but that you would not really be able to win a lawsuit saying Sonic's stealing the ideas of Super Mario Brothers. Castlevania series, definitely trying to do higher polished versions of the Metroid games, and there are considerably more Castlevania games than Metroid games. So Castlevania really should be a series that is just constantly getting new games instead of being this series that Capcom has completely forgotten about, or Konami has completely forgotten about. It's either Capcom or Konami almost always. I did cover that Tencent has bought 20% of ownership of Shift Up, the makers of my favorite lewd waifu game, Destiny Child, and I will say that the few people on Destiny Child's Reddit forum, Destiny Child Global's Reddit forum, did talk about that, and they're not super happy around the idea, but it is probably worth saying that people aren't up in arms about it or swearing to stop playing Destiny Child immediately because of it. The new AAA game that Shift Up is working on was going to be a Sony exclusive anyway, so almost certainly it was going to be censored, and it definitely didn't feel like it was going to ever be a game that tries to sell itself exclusively on lewdness. Yes, the main character may be in skin-tight outfits and exotic looking, but it's just going to be one main character, much closer to like a 2B in Nier Automata versus a Destiny Child, where you have hundreds upon hundreds of different characters and different revealing states of clothing. Like, since it's not a gacha game, there's still seemingly no big fandom of Destiny Child players that also liked Project Nikke, or Nikke Goddess of Victory, or Goddess of Victory Nikke, whatever the name of that game was. We have a couple of articles I had clicked on Twitter. A game called Paparazzi is coming to the Switch in early 2023, according to Gametsu. Is this Gametsu or GameDeveloper.com? No, this is Gametsu. And then Picross x Picobits, or PicBits versus Ouzboros, is now available worldwide, according to Gametsu. We're gonna need to burn through the news, I think, fairly quickly today, just so I can actually start to make some progress later today. I am once again trying to be ambitious and start recording on No More Heroes after I stream today. I feel a little woozy today anyways. I don't think I'm fully awake. So I possibly may go back to taking more naps or sleeping at weird hours. But yeah, I need to start recording now that I've moved my furniture around, moved my chair forward a little bit. I'm still not really sure if my eyes quite like this distance. Like, it may be that I'm a little bit more farsighted than I thought I was. Or, actually, I didn't think I was farsighted or nearsighted. I thought I had pretty perfect eyesight, but there might be something to that. Like, people naturally, if you have a chair that is not a big recliner like this, people naturally would lean towards just moving the chair forward a little bit, moving it back, and not even really recognizing that that's what they were doing. Let's see if this works. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just out of cards. So, unless I can win this turn. I have been noticing that I've been running out of cards more and more. I wonder if there's a new top tier meta deck move here that has been banishing cards like crazy. It is kind of an interesting animation you get when you do run out of cards, but it's not impactful enough. When you see how the animation goes when you summon Exodia and you see this giant Exodia on the field and big loud music, it feels like there should be something like that when you run out of cards. Might as well try and activate traps while we're here. Is there something here that is stopping me from running out of cards completely and losing? I don't understand. Can't declare an attack unless you send a card from the top of your deck to the graveyard. Nope, there it is. You just kind of have this dissolve sound effect. No cards remaining, could not draw. Yep. It's just not audio wise and visually wise good enough. Now you may notice we may stop running into network problems while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Too, which might be for the worse as far as my win ratio, because I do think network problems probably are a significant part of my winning strategy a lot of times on these card games. But let's continue. So Platinum Games official blog, which this is just a mess of a website, has a message from the Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and the Lost Demon supervising director Hideki Kamiya. They definitely are going in a very different direction when you look at this image. Is that like my eye is just drawn to this little girl Cereza, and it just feels weird to say the least. Like it's I don't have a better way to say this, but it would be like if you started to look at the baby pictures of your favorite porn star, like male, female, whatever. Like if you've been looking at a porn star and she has like giant boobs and giant secondary sex characteristics, and you've seen her completely naked, and you've enjoyed looking at that, and you know that body and that person from that perspective, if all of a sudden she started to show you baby pictures when she was like 8 or 11, that would be a little weird and awkward. Um, even your significant other, it's a little awkward, frankly. If you have married somebody and your significant other you're having lots of sex, you know their body inside and out, and then all of a sudden they're pulling out baby pictures. It's a little awkward, to say the least. Although at least in that case, you're not seeing your significant other, hopefully, as only a object of desire, whereas Bayonetta, as a character, as a cartoon character, really is visually depicted to only look as an object of desire. And arguably, maybe you just don't want that kind of humanizing effort or humanizing effect of a fictional character that has already been established one way. Let's see what they talked about this, but I don't know what this announcement really is. Blah 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 blah. First paragraph is just, hello, I'm this person. I'm elated. It's finally been announced, and I think many of our fans were caught off guard with the sudden announcement, as Bayonetta 3 is still hot off the press in a way. With that in mind, I'm sure everyone has noticed the magic word Bayonetta in the title's name, and many of you must be surprised to see Bayonetta taking a step from her regular gun-toting fare to visit a strange illusionary world that looks like it's straight from a fairy tale. So he's, I imagine, here trying to put out an explanation as to criticisms or a reaction to criticisms, or just frankly shock. I'd say it's probably more shock than anything from hardcore Bayonetta fans that you would make a game that's called Bayonetta and then just does not look anything like Bayonetta. Bayonetta, Cereza, and the Lost Demons is something very new from Platinum Games, made by a team of young, ambitious developers with just a few vets to help along the way. Ababe Tinari spearheads the efforts as the first-time director, and Tomoko Nishi brings the game's unique visual styles to life as the art director. So, in a lot of ways, I think he's already setting these people to be thrown under the bus. He's basically admitting what I think is kind of happening at Platinum in general, is that they're not relying on and or keeping their... This guy keeps attacking and destroying his own Ojamas. Like, they're not relying on the old creators and the old ways of doing making Bayonetta games. They're bringing up a new generation and a new team, and potentially, if they don't do it right, they are going to poop all over the legacy of Bayonetta just to make new games and call them Bayonetta. Very much this looks like a game that could have been called anything other than Bayonetta and play just the same. It really should just be an Alice in Wonderland game from the looks of it. Protagonist of Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and Lost Demon, is a long apprentice which, by the name of Cereza, yes, you're correct, it's that Cereza, our very own Bayonetta, albeit in her childhood years. I'm guessing that some of you out there may be intimidated by the word Bayonetta in the title. Perhaps you're not an expert at hardcore action games, or maybe you're not familiar with the Bayonetta lore because you haven't played any of the games in the series up to now, but rest assured this game is a brand new gameplay experience, different from anything the Bayonetta games yeah, this is not translated particularly well. We created Bayonetta Origins Cereza with the hopes that fans of the series would enjoy this unique take on her favorite badass heroine, and also endeavor to deliver an unforgettable experience to players who may not yet be comfortable with action games, or even players who are unfamiliar with the Bayonetta series in the first place. I would be very surprised if Bayonetta Origins here has any action gameplay mechanics at all. It definitely looked more like it was going to be an adventure game, maybe even turn-based type RPG type gameplay. If it does have some action in it, and this is their attempt to say, hey, let's make a baby's first Bayonetta and make the action more playable, that kind of makes sense, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense because there have always been easy modes in Bayonetta anyways, and with Nintendo funding Bayonetta 2 and 3, I seriously doubt any of those games are particularly difficult to play on the Switch. I implore you to take your guard down and approach this title with a fresh, open mind as you take a plunge into an adventure in the depths of the mysterious forest, controlling the weird and wonderful duo of a slightly timid and inexperienced young witch and a rough and tumble stray demon. Yes, you read that right. There's more than one protagonist in the game. His name is Cheshire, a demon who wandered into the human world in a forest filled with peril. The demon's raw power is essential for your survival. Players must combine Cereza's magic abilities and Cheshire's ferocious power in order to progress through the game. The way you control these two is truly one-of-a-kind experience, so you apparently are controlling them, like, probably at the same time. The story deals with two inexperienced souls growing up and finding out what they really are. Bayonetta Origins and Cereza and the Lost Demon is a chance to return to your childhood and see yourself where Cereza and Cheshire's adventures take you as you turn each page of this enchanting picture book. And because I was reading, I surrendered. I auto-surrendered. And this is inherently always a problem when either streaming or playing with this game, is that the countdown on this game is just too short. This doesn't, for me, inspire any new confidence, since I already knew that. Everything that's being said here. It seems, frankly, that they are just repeating themselves a little bit, hoping that the message that they had already said might sink in better or be better received if you just repeat yourself, which maybe that does work for people, but it would be sad if it does. Inherently, I don't see anything like new here that's amazing. It is somewhat fair to say that in some of the transitions of at least Bayonetta 1, it did kind of have the storybook feel to it, because you were seemingly telling this bedtime story to Lil Cereza in Bayonetta 1. And there were map transitions where there were little toys on a map, and you'd see this little wooden toy Bayonetta character move from one place to another. So they are staying within that tradition somewhat, as far as just a meta narrative idea, or leaning far heavier into that idea. But everything else just seems like it's different and new. I can't inherently blame Platinum for leaning into Bayonetta, though, considering how their other games for the past decade or two are not even memorable enough that I could mention them. I could also suspect that Nintendo may own some rights to the Bayonetta, some percentage of rights to the Bayonetta name, and so Nintendo might be pushing for a kid's game that has Bayonetta in the name, too. But as a fan of the Bayonetta series, this really doesn't feel like it's a Bayonetta game. It really, admittedly, isn't being made by anybody who made previous Bayonetta games. Admittedly, it's not going to play like other Bayonetta games. It is a very different spin-off game. And you have the general assumption that it is going to be a kid's game that is kidified and definitely like censored in a certain way, that it will be targeted towards a kids audience. You're not likely to have a situation here where little Cereza here does a provocative pole dance and then her magical hair suit disappears and she summons a demon to pummel a demon into bloody pulp. I seriously doubt she's going to do dances that are going to summon up torture devices to, like the Iron Maiden, and kick an angel type creature into an Iron Maiden, or anything like that. Like in Bayonetta 1, when they first introduced, I think, the Lust Demon, the Lust Angel or something like that, like one of the enemies straight up is like showing her groin spread eagle to Bayonetta. It's like there's a lot of adult bondage S&M subtext that is in at least Bayonetta 1, and you can't imagine that any of that is going to be in this game. It would be an interesting, we're gonna out Lolita type story if it was there. Like that would be very interesting, and frankly I would find it comedic if this was Platinum Games. They brought out Cereza and the Lost Demon and it was just a smack in the face to all of the censorship that is being put on other game developers, and they do have this little girl Cereza doing pole dances and losing her outfit and doing everything that adult Bayonetta does. Even if they were to try and kind of kidify it a little bit, and so instead of a Iron Maiden, they like kicked the angel into a timeout chair and with a dunce hat on it or something like that. That would be still quite a lot there. And definitely they will try, you can even see it in this image, they will try to have some kind of dancing, but they're going to try to almost certainly make it more kid-friendly little girl ballet dancing and not pole dancing. Inherently, when you look at that first scene, the very, very first scene of Bayonetta 1, and it establishes the tone of this is going to be an absolutely ridiculous, over-the-top game, and it has Fly Me to the Moon being sung in the background while Bayonetta is killing hundreds and hundreds of angels while dressed up as a nun. Like that kind of over-the-topness really established what Bayonetta wanted to be, and now it seems like with this they want to establish something very differently. I also don't know the backstory particularly well as far as Cereza. Like, it kind of feels like that Bayonetta's mom was Bayonetta who went back in time, and so I don't know if there is an original timeline where Bayonetta's mother actually wasn't herself, and the father of Bayonetta, I'm not sure we really know anything about that either. In a lot of ways it's an interesting question, and I'll stop talking about this in a second, but it is an interesting question to potentially ask the audience of Bayonetta fans. Would you have preferred this, which is just a completely weird spin-off game that's out of tone that's more than likely out of tone with the rest of the series, Or would you prefer that one of the alternate universe characters of Bayonetta that are shown in Bayonetta 3 be the new Bayonetta? Which arguably, if they are going to do that, an alternate universe Bayonetta probably would be a lot more in tone just by keeping them as adults. So I guess that'll be the last thing I'll say about that. The free games every day is still happening, with them fighting herds at the Epic Games Store being available right now. Of course, that just creates a weird situation for me where I have a game on the Epic Games Store, but I wouldn't actually ever remember or play it from the Epic Games Store, so I would almost certainly just end up buying it again on Steam at some point. There was a game that was free on Steam at the moment, but I, for the life of me, can't remember what it is. Of course, there's always games that are free on Steam, but this was a relatively decent one. Maybe Dead Space 2 or something like that. I don't remember. I don't think I have it left. Portal with RTX, NVIDIA RTX, has come out, and I guess it's been out for a while now, but we can see it is only 48% positive in the last 30 days. Looking and skimming over this, it just does not work. It crashes, it looks terrible. People have 2070s, 2080s, 2080 Ti's here, and the ray tracing can't happen. Now, it is slightly possible that the most latest NVIDIA graphics card updates have addressed a lot of this, but that does highlight a big problem with NVIDIA driver updates in the first place, is that they are hard coding and hard programming unique solutions to unique AAA games to make them work better and actually run, instead of just having a standardized set of APIs that are getting optimized and improved. So when you get a new NVIDIA driver update, the odds are it will make the games they are targeting to run and look amazing way better, but the odds are fairly low that they're doing much at all to improve, say, the performance of an older game or a non-AAA game. Just to pick a random game, Akiba's Strip, for instance, Undead and Undressed, almost certainly not going to see a lot of improvement with any individual NVIDIA driver update. Any of the Lego games, probably not going to see a major improvement. Older games, certainly. There's this general assumption that graphics cards can handle really, really old games perfectly fine, and they probably can, but they are not going to see any improvement. Where there is an alternate universe where you could make an NVIDIA driver that would do some spatial upscaling, super sampling, and take something that is like a 320 by 240 resolution pixely image and then just run it through some kind of AI type upscaling and turn it into a 1080p and anti-alias it quite a bit. At a certain point, assuming we can ever build computers powerful enough I could see having like a pixely 8-bit Mario, let's just use Mario Brothers for an example, and then having artificial intelligence look at the frame of that 8-bit Mario, identifying it as a human and identifying it as Mario, and then going, you know what, let's just pull in a 3D render of Mario from Mario Odyssey and just put him right there and scale it back down. And just do that for everything that would be on the screen. Every brick, they pull out a 3D model of a brick and just have a zero direct connection to what the graphics actually originally looked like, and just having AI saying, I see Mario, I'm going to use the highest version or most 3D version or most realistic version of it. We definitely have seen that happen in games, but it's been manually done by humans, where you can switch from old graphics to new graphics. But yeah, at some point we could probably have an AI computer do that, if it can do object detection particularly well. Alright, let's start going through the Video Games Chronicle articles. I think we had already talked about the McDonald's UK Happy Meals. Yeah, and trying to get some idea about what the Mario movie would look like through the Happy Meal toys. It's kind of dumb. I think we had already talked about Ubisoft Massive seeking local playtesters for the for its Star Wars game, but you have to be in Malmo, Sweden. Apparently, multiple veteran Criterion developers have exited the studio following Need for Speed Unbound. The departing group have all worked at Criterion for at least a decade. I don't think the reception for Need for Speed Unbound has been particularly bad. It is a little bit weird on its visuals, but I think people kind of liked it. But what this almost certainly was a case of is that you wouldn't have gotten your name in the credits if you left the company before, because that is very standard to happen in the video game industry. And you may not have gotten bonuses, or they may have even been promising bonuses and not actually delivered on bonuses, and that's why people are leaving. But to see a group leave at the same time, it probably means that they are planning to go start their own company or work somewhere else altogether. I'd like to kind of see a general number as far as how many people that is, because this could be as little as 3 or as many as 100. And it doesn't seem like they have an actual number. Multiple doesn't mean much. If you were to assume that they would always sensationalize to the biggest word they can, you have to then assume that it is less than a dozen. And probably less than 10. So I would, using the word multiple, I'd say minimum 3, maximum 9 people left. We are in a very different world today compared to the world that once existed, where you would stay at jobs for 30, 40, 50 years. So staying at a job for 10 years is still quite a lot. Mostly I would say if you left a job after less than 3 years, that's maybe a little bit of a red flag, but honestly it's not that much of a red flag too. the old way it used to work with unemployment in the United States, and I don't know how it works before, is that you would have had to worked full time for what would be the equivalent of 2 years straight, as far as how they calculate quarters, and then you could get unemployment for maybe six months, if you were laid off or fired, and then you could potentially work another 2 years and then get another 6 months off. So that would be about the worst example of somebody just not trying to stay with a company. But honestly, looking at things from that perspective and thinking that people are potentially manipulating an unemployment system and being super successful on that is really dumb. It's way more realistic to just assume that if somebody worked at a job for 6 months or a year and then left, it's probably because that job sucked. Like, other companies really need to make the assumption that the other companies around the world suck more, if not as much as your company does, and that there are just a lot of bad bosses and bad jobs, and just bad fits for specific people in specific jobs. And a lot of people get laid off nowadays for no fault of their own. We are just at the end of the idea of a labor economy, the concepts of labor economies. We've hit enough automation, we've hit enough resources that we don't need every able-bodied man and woman to be working a job in first world countries, at least. And we really are going to just have to get to some point of a universal basic income to try to balance out for the fact that we've hit a point where we can automate a lot of things. We're actually way past that point. Even the introduction of office jobs was the beginnings of the death of actually needing people to be in a factory or on a farm laboring for 8 hours a day. Of course, I guess that has nothing to do with the story. This isn't much of a story, though. Like we need some kind of follow-up on this. This is the kind of story I wouldn't even have run unless I was just absolutely desperate to put a story out. Because it would make a lot more sense to wait and interview those people that have left and see if they have any comment, or if they're going somewhere to form a new company, or if there's a new announcement to be made. Like, generally, I guess video game news should probably be positive announcements as much as you can make those kinds of announcements, instead of just a general negative announcement that isn't going to really mean anything to your average gamer. Like, your gamers in general, and particularly your average gamer, we just have like no idea who actually did what on making a video game. So there have been cases where we've thought like Ben Brode was the person that was behind Hearthstone, and yeah, I did hear Hearthstone has some kind of new failed monetization effort, but I didn't look into it. But when you look at Marvel Snap and Ben Brode's new company and the talent, the few people that left Activision Blizzard to join Ben Brode's new company, doesn't really feel like they were the sole creators of what made Hearthstone good back when it was good. Marvel Snap seems almost 100% different from anything Hearthstone was offering. I guess I'll just keep on playing and keep on losing. Video Games Chronicles has an article here. Final Fantasy VII Remake is now fully playable with a motion-controlled Buster Sword. I assume this is somebody made a custom Buster Sword. Which, that's a silly makerspace type thing to do. And I imagine that is a super exhausting way to play Final Fantasy VII Remake. I don't know if there was actually any motion controls in Final Fantasy VII Remake in the first place, where they would be trying to censor or sense the swing and the force or anything like that when you're swinging a control. I wouldn't be surprised if it is you swing the sword to the left to move a cursor to the left, and you swing the sword to the right to move a cursor to the right type setup, more than you naturally swinging the sword causes the sword to swing. If this was a gimmick that Square Enix really wanted to do, it would be much more newsworthy. But it would also be kind of stupid to have a plastic sword in which people are potentially swinging around and hurting their siblings with, or hurting themselves with. Let's keep on playing. There we go. Even when you look at this, you can see this Buster Sword is way too big for this room. And this is hardly what I would think a Japanese, like, 1 tatami type room, or 3 tatami type room that's even smaller. This definitely seems more like an American Western room. But it still feels like it's probably a 10 by 10 foot room or something like that. And that sword looks way too big for the space. So even if you were going to do a Buster Sword thing, you would probably need to scale it down for most people as a gimmick. We definitely aren't going that direction with VR. Almost certainly we'll have just controllers that have augmented reality on top of them, so it seems like you're holding a sword, but you would be swinging a much smaller controller in your hand, if anything actually in your hand. And then most of the sword, if you were wearing an augmented reality VR headset, would be just a hologram that only the player could see. Speaking of VR, John Carmack is leaving Meta, aka Facebook. This is the end of my decade in VR. We have a ridiculous amount of people and resources, but we're constantly self-sabotaged, is what he's saying out of this. The actual quote here is the end of decade in VR. and they added the his part, he may very well be implying more the end of VR, which is to say that VR came and went and is now dead from his perspective, which is, I think, probably a little jaded. If I'm recalling correctly, John Carmack may have been the guy who worked at Oculus Rift and got hired by Facebook or something like that, and then immediately either Oculus or HTC Vive or somebody was suing both Facebook and John Carmack for stealing technology and corporate secrets when moving from one company to the other. And so, if I'm recalling correctly, this is the guy who's probably spent a lot more time than he would like in court battles than actually working on VR. Here's another quote. We have a ridiculous amount of people and resources, but we are constantly self-sabotage. Well, they're saying we constantly self-sabotage and squander effort. There's no way to sugarcoat this. I think our organization is operating at half the effectiveness that would make me happy, he wrote on his Facebook page. So he's really throwing people under the bus. It's been a struggle for me. I don't know if he was the guy in charge, because if he was the guy in charge, he's effectively throwing himself on the bus too. Under the bus. It continues. A good fraction of the things I complain about eventually turn my way after a year or two passes and evidence piles up, but I never have been able to kill stupid things before they cause damage or set a direction or have a team actually stick to it. I think my influence at the margins has been positive, but it has never been a prime mover, which is, I guess, the lament of saying I was very right but nobody listens to me, which, heck, that is sometimes the case. Certainly is that you can be as right as you want, but if there is somebody who's a better smooth talker or better at just convincing other people to go their direction, then the person that's right will not be listened to. Which is always the... Well, that was a quote from, I think, Dionysius as to why he hated democracy, is that a doctor with a bitter pill that will actually help you will never be voted for in democracy over a snake oil salesman with poison that he's trying to get you to drink. I probably butchered that saying. I suspect some of this is directly coming from straight from the top in criticism of the Facebook CEO being obsessed with Meta and all of that. He may very well just have been... He may just be airing dirty laundry against... What's his name? I can't even remember. The CEO of Facebook. The Meta CEO. Let's see. Meta, which was originally Oculus before its acquisition in 2014, was founded by a controversial developer, Palmer Luckey. So I may be thinking Palmer Luckey that was always in the lawsuits. Carmack joined the project in 2013. Carmack, who made his name developing industry-shaking titles like Doom and Quake, will go on to work on his recent AI startup, Keen Technologies. So he's just going somewhere else. The final quote here is, enough complaining I'm wearied of the fight and have my own startup to run, but the fight is still winnable. Yep. So yeah, I could have been thinking of Palmer Luckey. It is worth pointing out that you are in this weird position where John Carmack isn't particularly relevant enough to be talked about in video game news anymore. He is historically relevant if you're talking about him making Doom and Quake, but him working on Oculus Meta VR is not super relevant because Oculus Meta VR is not super relevant to games or anything else, in my opinion. So yeah, it's not particularly worthwhile to continue to talk about him, particularly when he's just kind of airing some dirty laundry and moving on to focusing on an AI startup. Man, this deck is just not winning anymore at all. Yeah, we may have hit the point where this meta deck that I spent a lot of credits crafting has just lost any value. And certainly it's not the deck I like, so if I am just going to play something, I should be playing the decks I like, or try to make a new deck. If you haven't been checking the Epic Games Store free day games, you missed Costume Quest 2. I'll just leave that out there. A leaked Assassin's Creed codenamed Jade gameplay appears online, which, looking at this picture, it just kind of looks like an Assassin's Creed game. Yeah. So, I don't even know if this is supposed to be part of Jade. It kind of seems like it might be set in China. You see like this great wall behind here, and you see kind of a Chinese gate and Chinese towers. Maybe some other Asian country besides China, but I would assume it is in the past going to be set in mainland China. Apparently Microsoft could be introducing a cheaper ad support, or I guess they could introduce a cheaper ad support Game Pass tier, according to a survey suggestions. Ad supported Game Pass tier is an interesting idea, but at what point do you see the ads is the real question. Because unlike even movies and TV on something like Freemium, where there are ads that pop up in the middle of the movies and the TV shows, it's particularly offensive in the movies. Ads popping up in the middle of a video game does not make any sense at all, particularly if you're playing online. You can't be about to 360 no scope somebody in Call of Duty Modern Warfare and then an ad pops up and then you've missed the shot because of that, or if it's broken your stride. Even if you were just playing a single player game, if you're right in the rhythm of pressing the buttons and then an ad pops up, that wouldn't make sense. Even if it's just a ad in the corner, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So almost certainly what you're talking about is a very minimal amount of points in which you could have ads if you were going to have an ad tier, which probably means that the amount it is going to earn you is probably not that much. Like a $5 cheaper Game Pass tier with ads, maybe $5 a month would be my guess. And for that, I imagine you're going to have to watch a minute to maybe 3 or 4 minutes of ads before you launch every game. And then once you're in the game, I assume you can play the game forever, but if you swap out of the game, then you have to watch more ads. At a certain level, the Xbox Live infrastructure is already kind of laden with ads trying to sell people video games. That's pretty much all it is. If you're going there, is that you're going there to buy games. So it comes very much like Steam, where the Steam front page and the Steam recommendation tabs are the only place where Steam can even really put ads. So yeah, I imagine this is an idea that's very early in their thinking patterns, and they almost certainly would skip it unless they are just desperate to increase Game Pass people. And just the number of subscribers, because they very possibly are just hitting a saturation point there where they can't get any more people to be subscribers. EA Sports apparently has now correctly predicted 4 World Cup winners in a row. Lionel Messi captained his side to Argentina's first World Cup in over 30 years. I think that is particularly applaudable that they could estimate that when you're not going with the knee-jerk assumption that Argentina would have not won because they haven't won in 30 years. But yeah, I don't know anything about soccer, so I don't know how likely it really was that Argentina was going to win this year, because there could definitely be significant factors that were different with Argentina this year. They may have just had much better players, and players that are like much more accommodated for that Qatar heat and the size of the fields, which in soccer the size of the fields are oddly not standard. So there's just a lot of different things that would affect your estimates, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of bookies and numbers makers made very similar, if not the same, predictions as EA Sports did. You would be very silly to just buy a new copy of EA Sports every year and use that as your way of making numbers to be a bookie and run a gambling operation if you don't know anything else. Like, it would be kind of crazy to lean in on computer predictions of game scores. Although I guess in the future that may very well be where it goes, is that anybody can go to some online website and get a computer prediction of what the results will be of a game, and it will be accurate enough that you might as well not watch the game at that point. Moving on, FIFA is the UK's Christmas's #1 for the 10th year, which, yeah, I guess that definitely points out that, particularly in the UK, there is very consistent fandom that buys FIFA games and buys Call of Duty games. Every year that there is a FIFA and Call of Duty game, every year there's a FIFA game, obviously. It is kind of sad that we don't have more variety in the top selling games, but it's not super surprising, because you always will in any group have just kind of standard things that everybody is going to play, because you're collecting FIFA fans that love FIFA, and you're also collecting people that are just begrudgingly getting FIFA because all their friends are playing FIFA, or it's their second or third pick of 3 games they're going to buy each year. It's probably impossible to tell if this is good news or bad news, but Activision Blizzard's president and COO is leaving the company. The update here says Daniel Allegri will join a NFT firm called Yuga Labs next year, which probably means he's jumping ship for not even a particularly good offer. Although, in all fairness, if you are the person who's the president and CEO or COO of an NFT thing, then you probably still can get a golden parachute, even if NFTs and the companies fail miserably anyways. This deck still requires a lot of button pressing too. Toss this. Destroy this. Summon this. Direct attack, because that's what this guy can do. Come over to main phase and summon Zeus because I direct attacked it. And in the turn. Let's see. Apparently this Yuga Labs is the company behind the Bored Ape Yacht Club's NFTs, and he's going to be the CEO. In all fairness, it probably isn't a terrible jump for him to, at the very least, get your name away from Activision Blizzard. You probably weren't going to thrive that well in a Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard. If they're going to keep potentially the person in charge of Activision Blizzard, they're probably not going to keep the other people. If they're going to keep the CEO, they probably wouldn't keep the COO and the president. Eventually, I imagine they're going to try and get rid of all the C-suite employees at Activision Blizzard. There is something weird about these NFTs too that I didn't even know about. That there is a randomization factor on how they're created. Apparently, it's I assume it's some automated, almost AI art concept. So they get labeled as having like 5% smile, or this one looks like it's 100% melty skin. This is really grotesque looking as a NFT. But the point around it is that they're not just selling what feels like bespoke pieces of art that are created by an artist, or different variants that are very visually different from each other. That's not gonna work. I can cancel it. Well, I thought I could cancel it. Nope, couldn't cancel it. Interesting. At a certain point, it's worth mentioning that I don't know if there's a single employee from the lowest level associate who's a janitor to the highest level CEO. I don't know if any of those employees are worth keeping at all. Like there's got to be some good eggs in there, but even one bad apple tends to spoil the bunch, and there's obviously a bunch of bad apples at Activision Blizzard. So you're either going to have low-level employees who had no power, who are just irate and miserable because they've been abused, and unfortunately they're just so abused now that you probably can't convince them to come to work and care about their work and give as much effort as you'd like them to give. And then you're going to have entrenched jerks at the top level that are just going to be like, this is the way things were always done. I always got away with being a jerk. I'm not changing, and you can't make me. If I was Microsoft, I definitely would be looking towards acquiring all of the IP, all of the assets of Activision Blizzard, and then very quickly having a whole team set up to make every single employee re-interview for the job and just establish, are they going to be a part of this new team dynamic that I'm going to have to build from scratch, because things have got to change. Like, there's just no way that Activision Blizzard can stay the way it is and still succeed, because Activision Blizzard has been getting worse and worse as a company for years before this point. And I don't know if Microsoft really cares to do that or can accomplish that. I don't know if there's a single company out there that can acquire companies that have just become toxic from top to bottom and revitalize it. Like, it's a lot of work. Probably a lot more work than just starting a whole new company. Moving on, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are getting a 7-star Cinderace Terra raid. This is the first change players will get to catch. This is the first chance players will get to catch a Cinderace. I have no idea what this means, but I didn't even know there were effective raids in Scarlet and Violet as it is. Like, definitely means nothing to me, so I'll just leave this Video Games Chronicles article at that. Like, more and more I've lost interest in Pokemon, and frankly I was never really interested in Pokemon in the first place. I managed to save myself probably hundreds upon hundreds of hours of time throughout my life by never really playing any of the Pokemon games. Nor do I really have an interest to potentially play much of them. I may play like Hey You Eevee or Hey You Pikachu at some point, but that would be about it. Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters confirmed for Switch and PS4, including a $260 collector's edition, which I definitely don't think would be worth it. That does not look anywhere close to $260 worth of product, and they are severely overpricing re-releases or remasters of very old Final Fantasy games. interestingly too, the visual color palette here is very white and colorful, whereas Final Fantasy has always been more black art background with like gold lettering, at least in the more traditional sense. So I don't get it. White often is the color of death in Japan, and you've made it completely a white background. I should probably just cancel and not even bother to play. I think we're gonna lose here and lose a rank and then call it a day as far as Yu-Gi-Oh! King of Activision Blizzard King is shutting down its Crash Bandicoot mobile game. On the Run will see its servers shut down in February 2023. In-game purchases in now. I guess the assumption here is that the Crash Bandicoot team is not going to want to do any more business with King. Plus, I think Sony, in some level, owns the company that owns Crash Bandicoot, so this is a strike across the board against Sony. But probably a bad move if this is in any way influenced by the potential Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard King, because now Sony can go cry that here our product is being punished and being shut down in anticipation of the merger. It launched globally in March of 2021, so barely last a couple years. It definitely looks like it's just a generic infinite runner and not much of anything. And yeah, that definitely highlights the situation where nobody really knows how to make good mobile games, even with established properties. Apparently Epic is going to pay a record $520 million to settle FTC allegations. The Fortnite maker was accused of violating children's privacy and tricking players into making unwanted charges. And apparently they are very, very guilty of that if they're settling for a record amount of money of nearly $500 million, over $500 million. Which really just begs the question as to how many billions did they get to keep through these bad practices, because we have to assume that they profited more than they lost. Although I suppose it is possible that they actually can't prove that they made any money from those, but the lawsuits would still keep on coming, so it's worth it to spend $500 million now to end the allegations of the FTC instead of continuing the allegations. Ooh, haven't seen that happen before, where a card gets moved to the spell zone, trap zone. This card moved this to this and destroyed my trap. Yeah, I've seen these cards that can move cards around, and it's an interesting idea. It takes a lot of time, certainly, but I've never seen them go from trap zone to monster zone or vice versa. I've only seen them go left and right. Which that makes me realize that there's more to this idea than I thought. I don't even know how I have this field spell. The field spell doesn't belong to me. Apparently I can activate this card. Interesting. I just activated his card and moved him back. Which, I don't think I've ever seen a place where I've been able to activate an opponent's card either. Moving on, our last Video Games Chronicles article for today says, New Witcher 3 PC update should improve overall stability and performance. Notice they're adding the should into the quote, considering how people were not happy. And that's kind of just a great example of maybe they should have just left it alone and not done anything and not bothered to make an update in the first place. All the resources to make a next generation version of Witcher 3 just so you could potentially try and sell them mostly on the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. All that resources probably should have been just working on either the next Witcher game or fixing Cyberpunk 2077 to be more playable. And in all fairness, maybe most of the updates and improvements that they were adding to The Witcher 3 were things they had already figured out for Cyberpunk 2077, so it was easy to do this, but it does kind of feel like they're focusing on the wrong thing when they really should just be making new products. And The Witcher 3 as a product was perfectly fine. It was incredibly well received. So just saying you can play the PS4 version on the PS5 and just saying it's forward compatible would have been fine. Of course, it's a hard sell to say we think our game looks good enough already, so just buy the PS4 version. We're not going to make a PS5 version. Well, toss this one. Have to remind myself how to even play this deck. It's been long enough that I'm starting to forget. Why am I having to select so many cards? Because this is a completely different card than what I was thinking it was. That's why. Let's see if they can push this around. Okay. We hit this one. We hit this one. And we end the turn. Alright, going through the Gematsu articles, I think we had already talked about this. A game called God of Rock launches April 18th, 2023. This is a rhythm game. Phobia Saint Defina Hotel Studio announces a sci-fi horror game called Project Ada, A-I-D-A. Which, yeah, looks a little creepy, although in all fairness, I don't know what I'm really looking at in this. I don't know if I'm looking at a porcelain doll face or a robot face or something like that. I don't know if I'm looking at cracks with kind of black blood behind it, or if I'm looking at a black goo, or if I'm looking at electrical circuitry. Like the straight lines here versus the curved jagged lines here make it hard to tell. That is quite the name of a company too, Phobia St. Defina Hotel. Let's see if we can maybe watch this trailer and get a better idea. And inherently, there is two tiers of horror games. There are the horror games that don't bother to advertise at all and get released basically through Steam Direct on Steam, and a lot of those are asset flip games that still manage to look incredibly good and make it incredibly difficult to tell whether there's actually a game there or it's just an asset flip garbage experience. And then you have the second tier of games like this where there is some advertisement. I can see there's like blood on the floor and some reflections on blood on the floor, so that might indicate something as far as the level of polish. But yeah, you really never know, even in a game that is being advertised, if what's being advertised to you is much of an experience, because there's been plenty of games that have been heavily pushed in the horror genre in particular that there's a lot going on over here. But yeah, this entire trailer here is not doing a good job of telling you much of anything other than I saw human hands and they looked kind of like a girl in maybe an orange prison jumpsuit. We can see that there's a flashlight feature, and something just pushed me really far back. So this Pulsatrix, which that was labeled as Pulsatrix, but it is also labeled as Unreal Engine 5 Project Ada. So they're tagging it as a sci-fi survival horror game. But yeah, that is a tease upon a tease as far as not really showing you anything. They showed you a room, they showed you some arms, they showed you a flashlight lighting mechanic. Like, that is very early days, far too early in my opinion to even put out an advertisement here. Also, you have this problem of this being a focus on like the face of this character, whether this is the person you're fighting or the person you're playing as, and we just didn't see that face. It was a first person perspective game, so we didn't see who we're playing as, and we didn't see any enemies. Inherently in horror games, you need to see in the trailers, in the screenshots, what the enemy is going to look like. And yes, in horror, it probably would be nice if you held back and kept that a surprise, but if you want to actually sell the product, we need to have a general idea of what some of the monsters look like. Or at least a small implication of what the monsters are going to look like. That also creates a weird situation where you're never really going to be in the best situation if you wanted to make a horror. Oh, I did that to myself, didn't I? If you're going to make a horror game that doesn't have any physical enemies, and it's just all invisible ghosts or something like that, that really wouldn't work very well for video games, because it is a visual medium first and foremost. Something like It Follows as being something that's just invisible works in a movie and would work horribly in a video game. Moving on, Story of Seasons, A Wonderful Life physical editions have been revealed for North America. I kind of don't hate this idea of we're going to do a physical edition and there'll be a tiny limited edition that has a garbage, like, stuffed animal character. But honestly, all this swag stuff really does need to disappear. Arguably, even the plastic casings for games need to disappear and be much smaller. Like, we're at the point now where Nintendo Switch cases are just big enough that they wouldn't fit inside kids' pockets, or that they wouldn't fit into a clutch, purse. They still would obviously fit into a backpack, if as far as shoplifting is going. So we're past the point where we can really even care about that, and most video games are not unlocked anyways. They tend to be behind a locked case. Even in GameStop, the plastic cases in the stores don't have the actual games in them. So why not just take a Nintendo Switch case and make it a quarter of its size and have that be the standard size that holds a game? Very few people care about having fancy video games on their shelves and having it like DVDs on your shelf, and very few people even care about DVDs on your shelves. But yeah, you could very easily just get rid of the cases completely and sell the games on blister packs and cardboard things like they sell micro SD cards. Moving on, Bandai Namco announces Sandland visual adaptation produced by Sunrise, Kamikaze, Duga, and Anima. I don't know what Sandman is, though. This must be some kind of video game, I would guess, but Sandland Project. And see, this is funny because I kind of consider myself pretty well in the know of anime series. There shouldn't be some anime that is based on a video game without me recognizing it. And this big pink-haired guy that he's driving a tank. Apparently, the original story is from Akira Toriyama. That's a name I recognize. He may be involved with Dragon Ball. Yeah, ever since I've started to have to use my heater, my nose is dried up quite a bit. I had to turn the humidifier back up on to just try and reintroduce humidity. Let's see. So basically that was a complete failure, but it does allow me to get rid of a lot of the daily quests, and we just have this Duel Live it will take care of. Now that we're not doing the cup, we can be more on track to finish these daily quests. Ideally, I would be done with all of these. And there is definitely an argument to going back and doing some solo modes as just an experiment of where my chair is. To see if I need to move my chair even closer or if I just need to move it back. Yeah. I've never heard of this Sandland. Sandland is a popular manga created by Akira Toriyama, the author of the Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump, serialized intensively for short periods of Weekly Shonen Jump in 2000, and one-volume comics has gained worldwide popularity since its publishing. So it's just been a manga in Shonen Jump, a Weekly Shonen Jump, which is a little bit different than self-publishing mangas. Anyways, and I was right, Akira Toriyama is the Dragon Ball author. Although maybe he's not that involved with Dragon Ball Z animations. And I barely have heard of Dr. Slump, so I just haven't been following his career, and he's been sticking definitely to being a manga author. When you look at this character, yes, this does feel like something that the author of Dragon Ball would write, although in all fairness, if he's the author and not the animator, it would be a different animator writing things. So this could be a very big deal and very popular in Japan, popular enough to potentially bring a video game over to the world eventually. But it is worth pointing out, all they're announcing right now is an anime, and it's been 22 years apparently. Yeah. Like, this manga has been airing weekly episodes, a few pages, I think. Well, I guess what this, if I'm reading this right, it says it was serialized intensively for a short period in Weekly Shonen Jump and in 2000. And it literally was only one volume. So there isn't actually a lot of story there, which I guess gives me an excuse as to why I haven't heard about it. So it's very popular because it's from the author of Dragon Ball, but it's only one volume. It came out like 22 years ago. So this is really a revitalization. I guess if they make an anime and expand on the one volume to make an anime, there is a possibility Bandai Namco would make a game. Although it is worth pointing out that even though Bandai Namco does make a lot of video games based on their animes, none of them are particularly good. Moving on, Digimon Con 2023 is set for February 11th, which, okay, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an announcement of at least one new video game. They aren't saying games with an S in this description, but Digimon being a multimedia powerhouse, they're going to announce some toys and card battling things and an anime panel of some sort. Unfortunately, the last Digimon game was not particularly good. I had hoped it would have been a lot better. But again, it really just comes down to Bandai Namco making a lot of video games and stuff, but not putting any real funding or effort into it. And arguably, if you were going to try to tell me that it was just that the video game developers that work for Bandai Namco are just bad at making video games, I'd be willing to potentially hear that argument. I don't know if I believe it, but there is a very consistent lack of quality in Bandai Namco published games. It would be very interesting if Bandai Namco instead licensed some of their games to, maybe Nintendo or Square Enix wouldn't really be that good. It would be a hard choice to license it to any Japanese company and expect any better. But if they licensed it to some Embracer Group or Ubisoft or EA or something, that would be interesting. If I was Warner Brothers, I could certainly see that idea of saying, hey, let's see if we could get some of the license of Bandai Namco properties and make games around that, but then particularly if you're Warner Brothers. I don't know how you justify that, because it would make as much sense for Warner Brothers to hand over the Harry Potter license to one of the Bandai Namco developers and say, make us a Japanese inspired Harry Potter game. And that's why a lot of these deals don't work, is that everybody has a lot of ownership on IPs and not everybody has a lot of good game developers. There was a company or two, and this was many years ago, and I assume they've just actively given up on accepting game pitches. But there was a company that at one point was establishing a system in which they were having random developers or random companies pitch the ideas of making new games based on properties that the company owns, because they just didn't have the development teams, I assume, to make them themselves, or they didn't have any good ideas around old IP. Moving on, Final Fantasy 16 has a first look at Moogles, which the problem with this, I will say, is you make the argument that there can't be any dark-skinned people in Final Fantasy 16 because it's set in a medieval European timeline, and that they were going for accuracy. Well, you run out of accuracy when you have a flying bat cat creature with a ball on its head. Which I know traditionally this is like the Chocobo. It's just a character that has been in every Final Fantasy game for a while now. But if you're going for realism, you kind of have to stand your ground. And not just use it as an excuse when it's convenient to you. And I hate to be the one to bring up this argument, but almost certainly this argument is going to get thrown in their face. Of course, it will be thrown in their face by people who had no interest in playing Final Fantasy 16 in the first place. It will be just a bunch of mainstream video game journalists looking for a headline that weren't going to play the game anyways. Let's see, we already talked about the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster series. One Piece Odyssey demo launches January 10th, and they have a Memories trailer if you want to check that out. This is interesting that you have this image of basically the same characters, in the foreground at least, kind of fighting each other and being split, almost like it was going to be a Pokemon Red and a Pokemon Blue. And then you definitely have different background characters. And then the full picture here has like 4 different versions. So I imagine what they're trying to do is imply that this is going to be an Odyssey where these two end up going to a lot of different places. But somebody has given some kind of poor art direction and said they must be in a battle pose or a cool looking pose with Monkey D. Luffy at the foreground and the new character added to the game behind him, and then in the background in the sky there must be a third important character. And yeah, this doesn't really scream Odyssey as more of a 4-part epic collection of 4 different volumes of an anime. So yeah, I don't think that really works for my taste. This week's Japanese game releases include Earth Defense Force 4.1 for Switch, Valkyrie Profile Lilith for PS5 and 4. What else do we have? Hoko Life for Switch. Haven't heard of that. Majestic Majolinik for Switch. Manalese Eater Apex Edition. Money Parasites for Switch. Man, I do not recognize any of these games. Utu no Prince Sama Star After Secret for Switch, Witch's Garden for Switch. This probably is a really good week in which they are just releasing, either worldwide or specifically in Japan, a bunch of Switch games that would either be last minute purchases for Christmas if you're buying Christmas gifts for your kids in Japan, or they are just releasing them in this week right before Christmas because they know there won't be any major competition. Again, we're having fairly short list of even digital releases this week too. Pretty much everybody is shut down until the New Year's, and for video games that often means they're shut down until January or February. Smartphone game here, Kingdom Hearts Missing Links iOS prototype test is set for January 13th to the 18th in Japan, which they announced they were going to start production on that new rebooted hyper-realistic Kingdom Hearts game with that teaser video. And then they have nothing new to say, and apparently that instead they're just still trying to make a ridiculous collection of spin-off Kingdom Hearts games. The Kingdom Hearts series is a mess. I wouldn't be surprised if Disney at some point fully pulls the plug from Kingdom Hearts and from Square Enix. Of course, half of Kingdom Hearts is Final Fantasy characters, but if Disney doesn't allow the Disney characters, it's not going to feel like Kingdom Hearts anymore. If Square Enix pulled the Final Fantasy characters, Disney could make a Disney game that was incredibly similar without really any struggle, but Square Enix can't do the same. But dealing with Square Enix has always been this kind of, is increasingly showing itself as being a bad business decision, because the games don't sell, and then Square Enix blames the developers always for the games not selling and not being good, when it fairly obviously is the publishing side making bad business decisions. At the end of the day, though, if there was any kind of splits, that would just be the end of Kingdom Hearts, which is fine, because Disney on their own could make a much better game like Kingdom Hearts, that it makes a lot more sense and works a lot better. You already see that somewhat with like Moonlight Valley. The only difference there is instead of having Moonlight Valley have people do little mini games, you would just need to throw in some RPG action and an overarching story, which I think Disney can hire somebody else to do. I wouldn't put it past like Gearbox, one of the Gearboxes, one of the Embracer groups, to be able to make something like that pretty easily. Take the general idea of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and replace all the characters with Disney characters, and maybe replace the guns with sword swinging, or just stick with guns. I don't think Disney would want guns though. They'd probably want more magical sword swinging. Let's see. Metal Dogs Additional Content Update 1 launches December 22nd for the PS4 and Switch, and December 23rd for PC. This looks like this is a kaiju game. I probably did hear about this game originally and now just have forgotten about it. I have heard some more of the Giant Bomb End of the Year debate because it's just playing on my podcast when I wake up. So they're really into that Vampire Survivors game, and if anything, that just shows me that's yet another game where I could easily be convinced, if I was still listening to Giant Bomb, to buy that game and cover it, to only be incredibly disappointed when no average gamer really cares about Vampire Survivors, and the game is nowhere as good as they hype it up as. It sucks, certainly, that I don't have a group of peers that I can really listen to as far as game recommendations. other than just Steam reviews, which is the biggest group of peers. But that is just because I want some comradeship, camaraderie. I can't pronounce the word, can I? But in reality, having a fake relationship with Giant Bomb and feeling like that they are actually giving me good suggestions, or that the people at Giant Bomb that used to be at Giant Bomb at least were had any kind of taste that was anything like the games I like. I mean, that was just never the case, and it led me to buying a lot of games and playing a lot of games that I was very disappointed with. So I was definitely listening to mainstream video game journalists who are being more advertisers. Whereas I say, as a video game critic, I'm probably just very critical on everything, to the point where if everyone was to take my recommendations to heart and not ignore some of them, or or overlook some of the negatives that I point out, most people would not buy any of the games I play. Yes, I can say play Portal 1, Portal 2, undoubtedly, but that's pretty obvious. Most people would say that. Yes, I could say play The Binding of Isaac, but there are definitely a lot of caveats. Like Kerbal Space Program is a game I would say don't bother playing. Lots of people would play that, certainly. Anyways, I need to hurry up. The Legend of Heroes Trails into Reverie launches July 7th in the West for apparently the PS4, PS5, Switch, and PC. Another Legend of Heroes game, which, looking at the visuals here, I probably need a bit of a reminder as to what this game series is. Like, Legend of Heroes Trails of Reverie seems to be much more of a sci-fi modern timeline than Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Blue Steel, or whatever the train one was. And I'm assuming that those are even the same series. This definitely looks more mech and more sci-fi than I would expect. And that is quite the team you have. Guns and swords and mechs and sci-fi. It's a little bit of everything. Throw in some motorcycles and high action cutscenes. The animation doesn't look amazingly good, but it doesn't look terrible. That leans towards me thinking that it's a very long turn-based, according to the tag, RPG game. And there's nothing in this trailer that would imply any of this is turn-based, because they're just showing you cutscenes over cutscenes over cutscenes. Looking at this trailer, I definitely am less interested in this game now than before watching this trailer, because it's just all over the place. It's too much. Like, it's gonna be so anime in the sense that it's jumping all over the place and touching on every genre. Alright, let's start going through games on Steam. SCP Keter, mostly negative, which is a shame because this feels like it feels like this is more focused on actually telling a specific story around SCP, instead of just making an asset flip horror game and putting SCP in the name. But apparently it's supposed to be Dead by Daylight, Left 4 Dead inspired multiplayer, and it seems like it just does not work. Like, I don't know what the actual criticisms are. Wouldn't be surprised if the online is terrible. It's not good. No ambience, so you're in silence until SCP finds a D-class. Completely the same game mechanics as DBD. but somehow worse. Tutorial is only writing, saying what buttons to press. So this is a poorly made clone of Dead by Daylight using SCP instead of killers. It is in every way a worse experience than Dead by Daylight. Just play that instead. Don't give this dev your money. Okay. And I guess at a certain level you probably could just add SCP characters to Dead by Daylight instead. It's a bit of a red flag when you're naming 2 other games in the description of your game too. Let's see. Hidden post-apocalyptic top-down. I'll make a YouTube short around that. That was something I should have done over the weekend and didn't succeed at. Is making the YouTube shorts. So we have our first adult game, which is called Sex with Hitler 2, which was the Sex with Hitler 1. It seems to me like, at least in one instance, Hitler is turned into a lady and you're buggering Hitler. Yeah. But then most of these screenshots are just generic 2D colorful anime style girls that are tied up in ropes. Interestingly, it does seem like there was some attempt at an actual video game aspect to this, as like some kind of World War II strategy top-down tabletop experience. And it does seem like by completing the missions, that's how you're undressing the different girls from different areas. So there's like a girl with a Russian hat, so you assume she's Russian, and I think there's a girl with more of a French helmet. So yeah, interesting. What's funny is I think this is almost completely different to what Sex with Hitler 1 was, and Sex with Hitler 3D, which is a 3D CGI versions. Sex with Hitler 1 actually is very similar looking to Sex with Hitler 2. It's $6.49. It says it has English full audio and support for 103 other languages, which I don't particularly believe. It looks like to me the actual gameplay is a top-down twin-stick shooter. Clearly they're asset flipping somewhat, but they are thematically making an actual game here. And it's worth pointing out that this is rated 92% positive of 66 reviews. It's a shame that potentially this would be a series that succeeds in the adult game genre just because it is going to that extreme. But heck, it's working, and if anything, it seems like somebody stuck with the joke. Like, the first game obviously was a joke, and people probably bought it as a streamer bait joke that they thought they could stream on Twitch or something like that. I don't know if you really could do that. And then the joke got continued with the 3D version, and that apparently as a streamer bait joke also sold. So now it seems like they're going for a third a sequel, and yeah, it works, I guess. It's not the dumbest thought. Inherently in World War II, there were almost certainly similar kinds of parody, insult, things like this. If we replaced Hitler with Elon Musk, it was Sex with Elon Musk. it probably would sell the same amount. Or Obama, or Trump, just any somewhat controversial or well-known character. Moving on, we have something called X-Plane 12, which doesn't look like anything. Antimatter Dimensions doesn't look like anything. We have another adult game. So I obviously ended the stream, I guess, a little early on Friday. And so now we have Siren, spelled S-Y-R-E-N, and Friends, Roast the Devs. And these are almost certainly asset flipped CGI characters. Like, the models look incredibly varied, like they're asset flips. The environments and pictures look incredibly varied in a bad way, as in they just took a bunch of different assets and threw them all together. It doesn't look like there's any game at all. Apparently it's a hidden object game. It's free, but then it has a DLC art collection for 89 cents. It's English only. Yeah. Honestly, I guess if this was the way most of the adult games went, that they were free and low effort, that would probably be better for the industry overall, because most of the games that are being sold are pretty bad and overpriced. And I guess this would be a point where you could make an argument for advertisements in games, in adult games. I don't know how you really would do that, but adult games being free and then you having to watch an ad in between each slide puzzle or something, kind of makes sense. I'm having a hard time figuring out what this is. Ink Bunny, it seems to me like it's a slide puzzle with a weird grid paper background, and you just have to find the square pieces and put them all together. Weird game. I don't think I would be particularly interested in that. Let's see, is this an adult game? Nope, we've got just a standard visual novel, flat 2D colorful anime girls. Crystal Winter doesn't look particularly interesting. $2.48, English and Russian, which I guess, yeah, there is something slightly off on the size of the heads and the shadowing on this, but I could easily have been tricked. Certainly this looks like anime or Japanese animators. There might be something that's more obvious, is that if you don't have a character that has black hair, that's probably a bit of a red flag that it's not a Japanese animator, because by default Japanese people almost all have black hair, and even if you are doing lots of characters with different colored hair, you tend to see at least one that actually does have black hair too. Lunar Mad Dogs. This is an interesting idea, that you might have a game where you're fighting these kind of robot dogs with guns on their back, but somebody's gonna have to do a much better job at that. That is something that something like Call of Duty could lean into, is saying, hey, in the future we're gonna have robot dogs, and we're gonna have to figure out a way to stop them and shoot them if they're the enemy's robot dogs. Let's see, I think this is an adult game again. Yeah. There's quite a lot of adult games bundled on the 17th. So we have a game called Crochet Cavalcade, which is mostly terrible animation with a single girl, which this is YouTube family friendly enough, I think, to show So you have this single girl with just ridiculously large breasts, so huge that it's like coming down past her belly button. A different depiction here, completely differently animated here. So no real polish there. Says it's a visual novel for 99 cents. Says it's English only. Arguably, I think it might only be a chapter 1 of a game, which they need to do something about that. Does not have games that are unfinished being sold as finished products. Steam noticeably does not have any system for a series of games. Not really. You can sometimes get a list here for a series of game if you create it yourself, but there's no real highlight if something is episodic, if something is unfinished, if something's abandoned. This looks like garbage, this game does. If it's a volume 1 of multiple volumes. And usually game developers will point out if it's a volume 1, so you buy volume 2 and volume 3, but if you only make volume 1 and then give up, they won't point that out. They won't update their platform at all. This is probably garbage, but I'm going to give it a chance. As far as Saga Cube, yeah, we have a game that's already mostly negative, so I'm going to say no to it. We're at the December 18th listings now, so I suspect we won't see any real adult games anymore. Maybe we will. Miss Nico 3 seems like an adult game. Seems to me like though it's a censored version. Free bonus content may uncensor it. It's definitely tagged with not safe for work and nudity. But yeah, overall it seems like it's a match 3 game that you don't even get that many match 3 games. This did come out December 18th though. And I guess this next game is also an adult game, so we're getting them released. I was about to say that I haven't seen too many CGI games so far, but the next game is called Sex Simulator The Cabin, and it is CGI characters. It seems to me like it's 3 females in a cabin, maybe a little bit of interaction as the poses and scenes get created, but mostly I don't think there's much story here, if any. It's $2.09, English only. Yeah. The prices aren't terrible, but Sex Simulator The Cabin is probably very similar to several other games called Sex Simulator, because they are just all the same assets being reused over and over again, slightly changing the characters' looks or the background locations, and that tends to be the only thing that changes. Excuse me. This doesn't look animated well enough. You do get into this weird catch-22, or weird dichotomy, I guess is a better phrase, not catch-22, where you have low-effort adult games that are using nicely made 3D models or 2D assets so it looks really good, and then you have non-adult games that are made by people who can't really draw, and then you have these terrible graphics but some effort to actually have much more of a gameplay mechanic. First and foremost though, I have to say video games start with the word video, so if your visuals aren't up to snuff, people aren't going to give your gameplay mechanic the time of day, and that I am no different there. I will not play a game if the visuals look particularly bad. This looks like this might be an interesting kids game. A little expensive at $8.99. There definitely is a difference between minimalistic and bad. Here you have a minimalistic Sokoban box pushing game that almost would be acceptable if I wanted to play Sokoban box pushing games, but I don't, so I'm going to dismiss it. Beast Bay DX. This might be a Nintendo DX game ported to PC, or this might be a brand new game designed to look like a Beast, like a Nintendo DX game. Either way, I don't recognize the name, and it doesn't look good enough for a YouTube short. If anything, I'm going to try and be more careful. Next, we have Hot Springs Story 2, and I feel like this developer is flooding Steam with their games. Just very similar games. Oh, city management, office management games. Crash Son. Doesn't look like anything. And wow, we're up to December 19th as far as releases, and we're still getting adult games. Interesting. Interesting that there's that much variety. So we have Hentai Cybergirl, which is just an assortment of flat images of 2D colorful anime girls in slide puzzles. It is not impressive. In fact, it's particularly unimpressive because there's just no background and the images aren't scaled to the same size. Let's see if I can find one to show off. Like here. Like, no background really to speak of. It's not scaled up to the height. It's not scaled up to the width. And the box puzzles are like 6 box puzzles in total. It's selling for 59 cents and claims to have full audio support for all 103 languages that Steam supports. That's not believable. We've got a shoot 'em up game. Again, unimpressive sidebars there. Let's say no to that. We have apparently a platforming game. Oh, no interest. Silence in the Cabin. This is probably nothing, but I'll give it a chance. It's probably just a horror asset flip. This is kind of a great example of probably what a horror asset flip is. In that you're just not seeing the enemy. You have a lot of dark screenshot syndrome, and you're just not really seeing any real gameplay other than you have a knife and a gun at times. But there's still visually looks way better than most games, most low effort games on Steam. Like just this next game in comparison. Rubik's Cube game. Chai. Digital adaptation of a card game of the same name. I've never heard of this card game, Chai. And this does look like a ridiculous interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a follow just to be careful. But I'm not going to give it a YouTube short because visually this looks awful. Oh, speaking of YouTube shorts, the YouTube shorts that I did doing my experimentation and rapid development towards my new current setup of how YouTube shorts are going to look have started airing. So people may give me some feedback, although honestly for YouTube shorts I don't think I'm going to ever get any feedback. And that's fine because I am getting massive amounts of views. Just ridiculous amounts of views. I actually went and looked just to see over lifetime how many views I've gotten, and I have on my channel 450,000 views, which sounds like a big number, but then you have to also remember that I put out probably 10,000 videos, so at that point you're talking maybe 45 views per video if you were to average it out. Most videos no views at all, and certainly it doesn't, the number of views does not lead towards monetization as much as the number of subscribers does, so those numbers are just ridiculously large. Plus, you don't know if they're real. They could be, half of them could be bots, most of them could be bots. They could be views for a second before people click away. A lot of them will be that. But it does sound like a big number to people not in the know. If I got 1,000 subscribers, and I am set up, potentially, if I ever get to that point, to be fairly successful, to get a decent amount of money, maybe $400 to maybe even $2,000 a month, almost approaching the livable wage for one person, but nothing huge. And I only have 400 or nearly 500 subscribers at the moment, so for every one subscriber I need one more subscriber to subscribe. And that is my main hope, is that these YouTube shorts will lead to lots of people subscribing, even if they're only interested in looking at the YouTube shorts, even if that just puts my channel in a very different position, which we're already in that weird position anyways. Like, these live streams I started doing only because YouTube was pushing live streams. Now YouTube doesn't seem to really care about live streams, and yet there's a decent enough reason to continue to do the live streams. I wanted my channel certainly to be all about just being pre-recorded footage of me being critics of video games, and that footage has been the least promoted by YouTube and thus the least successful. Students of Light Bonds typing RPG with character creation. This feels way too complicated even for a typing game. Let's see. I kind of want to give this a chance, but it's just seemed really weird as far to have a character creator and this whole focus on making these like flat anime characters when the typing seems to be the focus, and it seems like what you're typing is Japanese phrases. So this might very well be a fairly decent game for Japanese kids to learn typing, and that might be why it's so customizable and so weird looking. But the seems very complicated. I don't think this would really work for English people. See, what I'm really trying to see is where's the stuff where you type, because it doesn't seem like here's where you're typing. You have to type that in Japanese. Yeah, that's not gonna really work. I'm gonna put this on the follow list just to follow it, but again, I think this would be too confusing for a Western audience to deserve a YouTube short. I'm being kind of picky, certainly, but I don't want people to think it's a typing game for English, learning how to type in English, when it's clearly for the Japanese audience to learn how to type Japanese phrases. It is worth mentioning that the YouTube shorts that we'll be showing right now are part of the rapid development, so for the next couple of weeks there's going to be some glitches and some bugs. I was just barreling through it and not going back and trying to redo things the right way as I was learning. But by the time you start to see a consistent like, share, and subscribe at the bottom of the YouTube shorts. That'll be the point where we are at this next phase. And certainly I can potentially try and improve it even more. I can't really imagine anybody's going to dislike the new layout. The new layout, I think, visually looks a lot better and does a much better job of putting things where they can be read. So yeah, I'm hoping for everybody to be happy about that, and they will be eventually at 1080p resolutions, so higher resolutions too. There is a weirdness though where you just kind of don't have that next step in YouTube shorts or shorts in general. It's like you make a short and then you hope they watch your next short. That's all you can do with it. It doesn't seem like it can really link back very easily to pre-existing videos or link back to a channel or have any other kind of call to action. Moving on, our GameDeveloper.com articles. Guerrilla Games confirms that Horizon Co-op spin-off is in development. I think we'd already talked about that. Devs allege that making and deploying cheats is illegal in a new lawsuit. Developers want to crack down on cheat makers and even some of the players who are using the cheats as much as possible. Which developer is this? Several high-profile studios are looking to crack down on cheating by arguing that the distribution and use of these cheats are illegal. It's always so pathetic when you have corporations literally just trying to change reality and say things are illegal. Like, corporations much more notoriously than individuals break the law non-stop and don't give a damn about the legality. If they did, they would actually pay taxes instead of dodge things. Try to not pay taxes. But then when they want something, they claim it's illegal. Which at a certain point, illegal probably should only mean criminal, not civil. And anyway, and this would almost certainly be a civil thing. The biggest problem here certainly is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was lobbied by big corporations to try and make doing anything that corporations don't like illegal. Now, the problem with this article, though, is that this article has no real conclusion or even any real investigation to it. So, you really don't have even the quote here that says illegal. Like, this is just literally an article that is recapping several other articles to link back to those same articles. This is an article that is 100% about these blue hyperlinks more than anything else. Like, there's not a single quote from a single person. It is just reporting on a report from Axios that is also probably sensationalized and inaccurate. This is just bad news reporting, frankly. I think we'd already talked about the Game Awards reaching its highest viewership in the show's history. I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but Steam's Christmas sale seems to be not happening yet, so it must be coming out pretty quickly. And they're going to try and give away triple the amount of Steam Decks. And I don't know if that means you have to buy something to be in the chance of winning a Steam Deck, or if there's going to be some kind of no purchase necessary event you have to watch or way of entering. I would hope it would be no purchase necessary, but maybe it would be buying something. Frankly, it wouldn't be that hard to buy something for like 50 cents to get an entry to win a Steam Deck. It seems like on top of giving away Steam Decks for the Game Awards, now giving away Steam Decks for the sales means they have a lot of Steam Decks. Although they did also say they weren't planning on changing much if they were to make a new iteration around the Steam Deck. So I wonder if we'll start to see Steam Decks given away at every major sale on Steam, which would be nice. I'm half thinking about ordering a Steam Deck or the Steam Deck version 2, and half not thinking about it. Because I don't know if I'd really do anything with it that would be worth the price. GameDeveloper.com does answer the question that we had earlier to say that 5 Criterion developers departed the studio post the Need for Speed Unbound release, where it was just reported by Video Games Chronicles that it was multiple people. 5 is kind of a high number, but not that high of a number, really. Like I guessed, multiple is more than 3, or at least 3, and less than 10, and I was within that range. Congress apparently has called on publishers to address extremism in gaming communities. Members of Congress want the game industry's largest publishers to address the rise of white supremacist ideologies in various sub-communities. I don't think this is probably a real thing. We're getting a lot of repeats articles from Axios, which I don't think Axios is owned by the same company as video games, GameDeveloper.com, but maybe they have some kind of partnership now. Inherently, yes, I imagine white supremacists play video games, or other hate groups play video games as much as anybody else, or at least most of them do. But I doubt there's a game out there where people are chatting either via voice chat or text chat to that same level that any hate group is successfully being able to pitch the idea of their hate ideology to somebody new and grow their numbers. I just don't think that's it. I bet hate groups probably that already are friends and already hang out probably play their games and hang out that way too, but I just don't think video games as companies should in any ways be in charge of deciding what is and what isn't hate groups or hate speech. I don't even really like the idea of hate speech. There should either be illegal speech because it has an actual direct connection to danger, like shouting fire in a crowded theater when there isn't a fire, or there should just be freedom of speech. If you are as much of a free speech absolutist as you could legitimately be, then that's really where I think you have to draw the line. But we don't need the government to give the green light to companies that are already actively promoting as much censorship as they can get away with in their chat, when it's really not fixing anything, and it's not making the game better for anybody in the first place. And even the video game companies are constantly saying that the players are getting more and more toxic, so that they're creating a problem so they can just push censorship as a solution. And now Congress has probably gotten somewhat into it. Now the good news is this is probably this is Katie Porter from California, Senator, and Lori Tranham from Massachusetts, I think. This is probably two of them putting out something that they promised to put out on their campaign trail and that they don't really care about, or it's something that they actually earnestly care about but won't gain any momentum. Honestly, as far as the government is concerned, the Senate and Congress at best are going to struggle to accomplish a few big things they need to accomplish, and then they just get locked into budgetary arguments and deadlocks around that. Um, I doubt there will be a point where any kind of vote or any kind of committee is created. If a committee is created, I'd have to suspect it is just because they're wasting government funds to create a committee and wasting government senators' times. Like, we're already at a situation where you can say roughly 100% of all video game developers and publishers out there do not want hate groups, white supremacists in their video games. So you can't really improve the situation more than that. The desire is 100% uniform in that direction. Moving on, John Carmack leaving Meta. We already talked about that. And then the Activision Blizzard president joining the Bored Ape company to build Metaverse. So is that what he's going to try and do, is make a Metaverse? Or are they just misusing the word Metaverse, which has already been misused so much it doesn't even mean anything? I guess they are trying to make a Web3 Metaverse type thing, according to this article. Yep, that sounds dumb. Metaverse, anytime I see that, that sounds dumb. Web3 sounds dumb. Not to be confused with HTTP 3, which sounds amazing. Although it's just going to be implemented and then nobody's even going to know it was implemented. Alright, well, we've got some fall list cleanup here. I guess this has 30 positive reviews, so I can put this on the wish list. Apothekeeper, Apollon, River of Life. I'm gonna give this some more time just because I don't want to make a decision. It is early access though from 2021, so there is a very decent argument to give up on that. So, actually need to go to the bathroom, so I'm just trying to wrap this all up. That is definitely still a problem where I just cannot manage to sit for 3 hours in a stream without having to run to the bathroom. Aperture Hand Lab is in the library, but it requires VR. This is kind of a great example of Valve experimenting, and then their experiments getting forgotten. Like this whole hand VR technology has not really led to any major development in VR as far as controllers, or enough development in my opinion. Probably has made some. This game is still early access even though it's very positive, so I'll give it more time. Antioch Scarlet Bay is very positive, so we'll put it on the wish list. It says it's single player and online co-op. I wouldn't be surprised if the online doesn't have very many people playing it. And then another farm roguelike. Do I want to play this kind of game? I don't think I do. I'm just so uninterested in farming games these days. We have I'm Not a Cat saying hello on the chat. Hello. Are you a cat? I suppose this is the right response. Unfortunately, he came on the chat right as I'm about to wrap up the stream. Another I think this probably is a horror game, is not relevant enough. Yeah. I'm going to take this off the follow list. It just doesn't have enough relevancy. Another Day in Paradise. Is this an adult game? It's horror, psychological horror from 2021. Yeah, I think we can take this off. It's not just visually polished enough. And then Anno Mutationium. It's rated very positively. Is it out of early access? Yes, it is. Is it connected to the Anno series of games? Is there an Anno series? I'm not a cat goes, lol, I'm not. That's what they all say. Alright, we'll get this live stream, this Duel live playing, and I'll go down my Twitter feed to see if there's any new news we're talking about, and then that's going to be it for this stream. Thank you to I'm Not a Cat for hopping in and saying hi. Let's see, I imagine on this Monday we won't be getting that much new news, as I assume everything is going to it's not much is going to be announced over the Christmas holiday time. Apparently Riot wants out of its deal with the disgraced crypto firm FTX. I'm Not a Cat asks, any good MMO games? I'm not an expert on MMOs. There's, to my knowledge, the legacy servers of World of Warcraft. I think people like those pretty well. There are people that like Final Fantasy, I believe it's 14 as an MMO particularly well. There are EverQuest fans still playing EverQuest, which I think that's an MMO. But that's probably about all the MMOs I could even name that are worth mentioning. Now, if you don't mind getting away from the multiplayer online part of it and you just want to play something that feels a lot like an MMO, there's plenty of Japanese RPGs out there that are basically doing the same thing, but it's a single player experience. But of course you won't have that community connection if you're just playing it all by yourself. I could mention the Uru fan servers is technically an MMO if you love the Myth series. You can play that for free online. Uru, U-R-U. I guess that is also an MMO. But yeah, that's about all I can name. There are definitely multiplayer games that I play, but they're not massive multiplayer online things. Conan Exiles is maybe an interesting twist on a game that I don't think really is that much of an MMO, but it's somewhat like that. Minecraft, again, not really an MMO, but you can play with your friends. Or you could join one of the public servers. I'm Not a Cat says EWU fan service, lol. No, it's ERU. And nope, it doesn't have any fan service in it. Not the kind of fan service you're talking about, at least. I bet there probably is an adult themed Second Life type MMO out there, but I couldn't tell you what it is, and it may very well just be Second Life. There is that whole space one the EVE Online. I guess that's a big MMO too. So yeah. But yeah, I don't even play games online, so I am just like the worst possible person to ask as far as online games in general. No. Alright, well, we got the Duel Live done. There isn't any new news to talk about, so that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos because that helps me with YouTube. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon. Sometimes that works. And then there is a link where you could friend me on Steam and give me a gift card or game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.